Hello, I'm Tyler Smith of Battleship Pretension here with another entry in the Tyler's Movies collection series. And we are continuing our mini series, I guess you could say, about films about politics because we are now into the primary season where votes are actually starting to take place. The Iowa caucuses have happened, New Hampshire is coming up. And so I thought it would be fun to talk about movies that are political. So, today we'll be talking about the Oliver Stone film W, which a lot of people have just forgotten about over the years. When people think about Oliver Stone, they definitely think of somebody who is a political filmmaker, but they think in terms of, Born on the 4th of July, JFK, Nixon. And this one kind of gets forgotten, probably because it was made so much later than those films, and probably when Oliver Stone is not what he used to be, at the very least, as far as his status as a filmmaker. And so, but I think it's a film that deserves consideration, especially in his filmography, because if there's anybody that seems most inclined to make a film that is critical of George W. Bush, it would be Oliver Stone. And yet, the film, while uh, certainly having a lot of anger and a lot of frustration at the Bush administration, a lot of it reserved for Cheney. Um, the character of George W. Bush is one that I think is very interesting. He's played by Josh Brolin in the film, and I think even that casting, playing a guy who I think has a natural likability on screen and just has a nobility to him. And when we think of George W. Bush as a cowboy president, it sort of makes sense that Oliver Stone would cast somebody who has a certain cowboy quality to him, as we had seen the year before in No Country for Old Men. So the casting already just gets us on George W. Bush's side, which I think is meant to emulate the way a lot of people thought about George W. Bush. Early on, he didn't seem like an evil guy or anything like that. I say that as though I'm implying that he would go on to be seen as an evil guy, which some people do, but I don't think everybody does. But early on, he was just seen as this very likable, very relatable type of guy. He's the guy. The phrase was, "He's a guy that I feel I could have a beer with." And Josh Brolin feels like the kind of guy you could have a beer with, which I find interesting that he's going to be playing Thanos in the Avengers films. But nonetheless, but I feel like the film, when we think of angry political Oliver Stone, we think of Platoon, we think of Born on the 4th of July, we think of Wall Street, JFK. Um, and then there's a movie like Nixon, where he is clearly trying to engage with an historical figure that he does not like and does not agree with. And I feel like W is cut from that cloth because you have two guys that Oliver Stone is probably flabbergasted by as far as their beliefs and their choices in office, but he is an artist first and foremost. And I know that there are people who would probably say he's a propagandist first, but I think he's an artist who is intrigued by character, he's intrigued by theme, and by tackling these public figures that are despised, and probably by him, he seems to have tried to get to the bottom of exactly what it is that made these people who they are. And you can't do that uh, if you're looking to make a movie that has absolutely no sympathy for them. So I think when you watch a movie like Nixon, you see a character uh, that is just, I don't know, he's everything that he does is informed by his insecurity and his self-hatred and his desire to be loved. And while he does again, I'm not talking about Nixon, but I compare the two films in many ways. And so even though Oliver Stone and many people don't like what Nixon did in the film, it almost says yes, but underneath all of this is something that is very relatable. And in that same way, I think in the movie W, you have this guy who is never quite sure where he fits. His father is very successful and, in fact, becomes the president of the United States. His brother, Jeb Bush, who is currently in the primaries, although maybe by this time it's after the Iowa caucuses. Maybe Jeb Bush has dropped out by now. I have no idea. But but he just doesn't really know where he fits. He's always seemed like kind of a screw up. And so he just sort of lets other people dictate where he will go, and then he does his best within that. But he always seems to be looking to prove himself, and he always seems to be looking ahead at, well, what's the next opportunity to prove myself? And one of the things that the film puts out there in a really wonderful cutaway sequence involving baseball is that by always looking ahead at, okay, well, how can I know where I am now, so maybe people will like me and approve of me now, but what about next time? That in thinking in those terms, the character of George W. Bush fails to realize that you're the president of the United States and you've been reelected. You're where you need to be. There's nowhere you can go beyond this. This is the height of everything. You are the most powerful man in the world. So stop looking for approval. Stop looking for the next thing you can do. This is where you are. And so I think the film makes the argument that maybe he let himself be manipulated by those who had a stronger will and a stronger sense of purpose than he did. So it certainly doesn't necessarily make him. It doesn't excuse him. It doesn't. It doesn't have a lot of. It doesn't find him super likable, but it does find that sympathy, and it finds something that I think a lot of us can relate to within a public figure. Who, I mean, this film came out in 2008, so George W. Bush was going out of office, and his favorability ratings were very low. To this day, people still think of him as a very bad president. But it's always interesting to look back and watch a movie that is genuinely, I think, sincerely trying to figure out what drove this man. So it's worth watching. I really enjoy it. It's not a great film. I don't think it's necessarily one of Oliver Stone's best, but I do think within his filmography, it deserves to be watched. And there's a lot of great performances in the film. I really enjoy Josh Brolin as George W. Bush. He interprets the character in a way that I find very interesting. But anyway, so the film is streaming now. I highly recommend you watch it, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.